Welcome to Founders Field Notes, the podcast where you can learn from founders how to become a founder. I'm founder and CEO of Klugonics Group, Jason Klug, and serial entrepreneur. This week's episode, we have Jon Bradshaw, fellow podcaster. It was great to connect with him, actually, because as I continue to learn and figure out how to do this podcast thing, it's great to speak with him, who has a very data-driven approach to how he does podcasts. So it's cool to hear his process and how he figured out how to grow and get a lot of listens on his venture capital podcasts. So definitely worth checking that out. But also, Jon is a founder with a company called Codebase, which has a fantastic business model where he helps companies do headhunting in India around software development. And it's a creative service offering, and he's continued to grow it dramatically and has learned a lot about building a company in another culture, like I have as well with, building the office in China. He's built his office in India. So check it out. Jon Bradshaw, learn about building Codebase, how he got the idea, and all the other data-driven experiments that he's done, and how he's also navigated building something with a lot of cultural differences and has found his success.
The VC podcast, people thought it was Scott Paul's podcast.
Oh, because he's been on it a couple times, right?
We did one. He recorded one evening, and we did 3 episodes.
Yeah, I saw that he was on. Or you did one last week. Then you released it.
I've got one more.
Week.
I'm trying to do 2 a week right now.
Yeah, I did Scott early, just because because Scott and I have known each other for like 12 years now, so we go pretty far back. So he's an easy one to.
So you got the deep stories.
Record. Oh yeah, I've done weird stuff with Scott, like. When I worked with, because I worked with him at Armor Active, his first company.
Okay.
I was his engineer. So that was like before he sold anything. So he was still kind of like in the trenches, I guess, I'd say. So it was very different back then compared to now. Now that he's had his exit and has done all of his investing and has made a name for himself as the weird crypto guy. But I remember like we went to do that Corona arch swing down in Moab together, which was a lot of fun. I did, like, his dad was there. A couple of our coworkers, and his dad owns the Momentum climbing gyms.
Okay.
So they had all the gear, so I felt safe because it's like, they're all they know what they're doing, and they rigged it really well. And I just remembered like the night before, and this is when I was maybe worked for Scott for maybe like 4 or 5 months. So we're still like getting to know each other. And we ended up having to sleep in the back, just the two of us sleeping in the back of a Subaru. And it was so hot. We were like both just like laying in our underwear.
Okay.
And we were just laughing so hard about it. And he's like, this is the beginning of like a long relationship. And it turned out to be true.
Those are fun moments.
Yeah. It's so funny. Yeah. So I'm glad we connected on Instagram and LinkedIn. Because your podcast was kept popping up on my feed on LinkedIn. So I was like, oh, interesting. I should probably connect with this other podcaster. And then you messaged me like soon after I, connected the dots. Yeah, and then we had some lunch. So it was great to connect and talk more about podcasts. So it's how often have you done other podcasts being a podcaster? Do you do them often, or is this,
So I have about 10 different podcasts that people don't know exist.
Okay.
A lot of the times when I look at a podcast, my strategy is I have a purpose, and then I try to figure out what are the top of funnel keywords that might, create a really good funnel for a business that I'm working on. And then I'll do like 2 or 3 pilot episodes, and then I'll let it sit for 6 or 12 months. And then I'm looking to see which one gets traffic. So
you have 10 of those right now going?
And I want to launch like 5 more.
Really?
But the one I focus on the most is venturecapital.fm. And then I've got another one that's kind of archived. That's howtostartabusiness.com. And both of those have done really well. Like they get traffic even if I take 3 or 4 months off. The way we've built it in the system, it runs itself.
So when you're doing these, are they more just you talking about various subject matters, or do you always do it with a co-host? Do you always do it with a guest? Like, what is your format, or does it vary every time?
So it depends on the content. For a podcast in general, it'll be like me recording like a pilot episode of like for 30 seconds, and then the first episode, and it's just me. And I just want to see if I have a good thumbnail and a good podcast title, can I get traffic?
Yeah.
I think that's the hardest part about building a podcast that people forget is they record podcasts for like, 90 days and they're like, where's the traffic?
Right.
Where I like to plant a few seeds and then I want to see, does it have potential? So when we launched the Venture Capital podcast, I launched 4 others with it at the same time.
Yeah.
I launched Startup Investor, I launched Angel Investor, and then I launched Venture Capital. And Venture Capital right out of the gate started getting traffic with the automated like marketing stuff we were doing.
Yeah.
And it was converting much higher than the other podcasts. And so at that point, you run your tests. I then cut you cut bait because those other podcasts still got traffic, but the Venture Capital podcast got significantly more traffic.
Right. I mean, it's just more of a buzzword, I guess, or I guess it's just more interesting content. But everybody always talks and thinks about venture capital when they're starting a business. It's always like a subject matter that's on their mind. And, whether it's something they strive to interact with is raising money from VCs or whatever. The partner you do venture capital podcast with, he is more of a VC, right?
Right. Yeah. So he is a VC. His name is Peter Harris. He's in his career, he's been at 2 different funds, the University Venture Fund and then the University Growth Fund. And he's done like Spotify, Lyft, other investments like that. And so the dynamic we go from this podcast is the way we want to be unique is just we're trying to be as transparent as possible in the VC space because we feel like that's not very common. And I think that's what's given us a lot of our lift. And then he brings the VC perspective and I bring the founder perspective. And then like we'll debate and argue on the podcast on purpose.
And your company, which we'll get into more, is funded, right?
No, I've only taken funding once. I raised a fund once.
So then going back, because your work history, you've done like a variety of things. And then hearing about how you run your podcast where you're doing a lot of A/B testing and everything. Obviously, you've got a good background involving like marketing analytics and stuff like that, right? So it looks like you were in marketing analytics back at Family Link. Is that like fresh out of college? Was one of like the first things you did professionally?
Yeah, I feel really old when I tell the story. But when I was at BYU, I felt like the internet was going to be like big, and BYU at the time wasn't teaching about the internet and internet marketing at all. So I asked around. I said, "Who was the smartest person within 100 miles radius that knows internet marketing?" And everyone talked about Paul Allen, the founder of Ancestry.com.
Oh yeah.
And at the time, he had started Family Link. So I didn't really care about genealogy, but I cared about being around smart people that I could really learn from.
Yeah.
And so that was like one of the first and only jobs I've ever had.
When you're at that company, were you having to figure things out, or did you have then a department that was around marketing analytics? Or were you having to figure out marketing analytics kind of as a startup within a startup type scenario?
Yeah, I think it was Paul Allen just threw me to the wolves.
Yeah.
So he'd be like, "Hey, we need to go create a WordPress site. I know you're not a developer, but go figure it out."
Yeah.
Or he would ask me to, he's like, "Hey, we need to do, what's that name? What was one of the first social networks?"
Not Facebook, MySpace.
He's like, "We need to create a genealogy page on MySpace. Go do that."
So this is 2007, 2008 or so. Yeah.
Or he'd be like, sense. "John, go do link building for us." Yeah. And a lot of it, I would just go home. I would research what I could find and I'd go do it. Or he'd be like, "John, we need to run an affiliate program."
Yeah.
Like, go run the affiliate program.
That's kind of similar, like what I was fortunate working with Scott, where I had to like build an engineering department. Okay. And, I was young. At that point, I was a college dropout that, knew how to do CAD work and build stuff, from a high level, but I wasn't like an experienced, trained engineer. I just knew how to use the systems and tools to do stuff. And he let me experiment and build. And I feel like that was such a valuable foundation for starting my own business. So it's, I could see that being...
They don't teach you that in college.
They don't teach you that. Like you have to dig and find resources to talk to and ask questions. And then if you don't do that, it prevents it from being successful. But I've met a lot of entrepreneurs that have had some kind of opportunity like that, where they've been thrown into a company or in a position that doesn't exist and have to form the position or the department. And, you walk away with a lot of value. They don't teach that in school. So then you started your first company there.
My first company was actually a lawn mowing company when I was like 14.
Okay.
My dad made me start it.
That's like a common thing too, right? The lemonade stand or the lawn mowing or snow shoveling.
But I got like the neighbor kids to work for us. It was my first like management experience.
Had a little QuickBooks account maybe? No.
I didn't. My dad did what is it? He did something like QuickBooks. So he was like my accounting guy.
That's cool. So you'd figure out P&Ls and all that?
Hired the neighbors, learned that when I hired people, I lost all my money.
Yeah.
Paying them to sit while I worked.
You went from Family Link to Boom Startup from there?
So I was doing Family Link, and then I teamed up with John Richards at the Utah Angels.
Mm-hmm.
So that was like an early stage, like an angel investment group.
Oh yeah, I see that. 2008, 2000. So you were there on the side for quite a while.
I was there on the side. I did that while I was in college, and then the plan was that the Utah Angels had talked a lot about creating a sidecar fund,
Mm-hmm.
and that's basically where the Angels will pull their money together. And then they invested in one entity, and they said, we need someone to manage this and run this. And then one day I woke up and I'm like, this is never actually going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to Silicon Valley with a friend, and I wanted to just interview with VCs down there because I figured, well, this is kind of like the next step. Here's where my career has kind of taken me.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of like that more than the marketing stuff at the time, being a founder.
Yeah.
And I stumbled across the Plug and Play Tech Center, where I then learned about Y Combinator and Techstars. And I said, you know what, I'm not going to be able to raise a $10 million fund.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, they were giving $15,000 to like 10 companies. So I'm like, I could raise $150,000 plus a little bit extra for management.
Mm-hmm.
And then that could be like my startup.
Mm-hmm.
And I can start my fund. And at the time, I saw myself as being like the next Gavin Christensen.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to create a fund.
Yeah.
I'm going to have a track record, and then we're going to go. But it turned out to be a mess in the end.
Well, 150K is tough to, get legs with.
Right. So we were basically giving, the model was at the time, was you'd give $15,000
Mm-hmm.
to 10 companies.
Mm-hmm.
And they were, all pre-revenue companies, mostly I did. But what that 15K did is it gave people the confidence and the courage
Mm-hmm.
to jump. And at the time, that I would look at the day today and I'm like, I would never take that deal.
Totally.
Y Combinator would now give you $150,000 for 7%. But at the time, that was the market rate for a lot of these,
Yeah.
early like ideas, pre-traction startups.
Yeah. What did they do the valuation at? Like a fixed, like $500,000 type number or something like that?
No. So at the time, one of the partners there said, if you've got more than 2,000 lines of code, we're taking 7%. If you've got less than 2,000 lines of code, we're taking 10%, which
So
I think
mostly
was
software then.
Yeah, I think, but truly at Boom Startup, we didn't know fully what we were doing.
That's
at the time.
interesting to do it based on lines of code.
And that was just one of the partners. One partner went out of town. The other partner said, John, go ask the companies where they're at, and this is how we'll make our decision.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never heard of the value of a company based on how many lines of code they have.
Yeah, I think there's...
Because what if they're really short lines,
Oh, I mean, that was my point too, because I'm like, I can install a WordPress site and technically count that as 2,000 lines of code.
Yeah. The pre-built stuff that's already embedded or like the chassis of the code that's already there.
Mm-hmm. But I think at the time, like looking back, it's easy to be critical. But at that time, those type of programs were still very wild west.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I remember even early on, I remember going to some Boom Startup events and then seeing some of the companies that were pitching at them. What was some of the other Utah ones that were similar to that? Like accelerator programs.
I kind of fell out after I left Boom Startup at the end of the first year.
Because that's Rob Coons, right?
Yeah, Rob Coons and John Richards.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
I left at the end of the first year. Every year after that, a director would bounce out because I think we all just had these visions. But I think if we talk about field notes, when you're picking founders, everyone's vision needs to be the same.
Yeah.
Like I remember John Richards, who I love, so don't take this the wrong way, but he kept making, the big reason why I bounced out was after we started the program, he's like, no one's ever going to take a salary here. No one's ever going to take a management fee as part of Boom Startup. And I looked at Boom Startup as being my startup. And I'm like, how can I live as a founder if I can't take a standard management fee? And, I think he looked at it as being more of like a way to give back. Yeah. Perhaps. And at that point, I'm like, well, our incentives aren't aligned.
They didn't need money like yourself at the time, right? Like they were already had their exits.
And I don't know what their vision was, but my vision was like, I want to build the next Kickstart.
Yeah. So you wanted to almost have a small venture capital fund that had the accelerator component tied to it.
Yeah. You start at the bottom, you start getting traction, you work your way up. And I'm like, Lucidchart applied year one and had Lucidchart been handled differently, they would have been part of the program. And assuming Boom Startup never messed up Lucidchart because it could have, that would have totally changed my career in the VC space.
Yeah, because then you would have gotten a solid return from that. Yeah. Did Boom Startup have many of those hitters or like good projects?
So I think they had a really good exit with 4UP. But after the year one, I sold my shares back to John and Rob. And then at that point, I don't know what happened financially.
Okay. Because I remember seeing the company Simple Citizen going through it. Do you remember them?
Yeah, I know Simple Citizen.
The citizenship. And I don't know if they did a deal with them, but Like, I think they did very well as a company.
Yeah, Simple Citizen, I think, did really well, but I know 4UP did really well. They were in round 2.
Yeah.
But I went offline pretty much after that.
Yeah. Okay.
I said, I'm going to go back to the founder role.
Yeah.
The big ass part of it is I hated, kissing ass. I hated just sucking up to these VCs.
Yeah.
Like, because I think at the time, I think my ego was really big.
Mm-hmm.
But you're hanging out with people like Jon Bradshaw, who's the founder of Omniture, and I think just to be in that space, you have to be very confident. But I felt like I had to argue a lot to convince them of what it was. Like when we launched Boom Startup, I gave the exclusive to TechCrunch for a launch, and I remember one of the investors, who I won't name, got mad at me, and he said the Deseret newspaper was going to give us a front page article, and you gave it to TechCrunch.
I mean, TechCrunch is pretty big.
It was huge. Like when they launched it, it was the
way
biggest.
Hot back then.
I mean, we got 7,000 or 8,000 website visitors that day, the next day. Where when we finally got our front page color photo in the newspaper, there was no noticeable difference in traffic.
Bump. Yeah.
No bump.
Yeah, that's. I mean, those are all those things that you live and you learn, right?
But it was dealing with that. I felt like the internet age was changing a lot, and that some of the people we were working with weren't very connected. Yeah.
So that was your Boom startup side. And then at the same time, you're also working with the Utah Angels on the side. And I'm guessing, were you helping?
I was running that in Silicon Slopes at the same time too.
Yeah. So were you lining up deals there and whatnot and kind of looking deal sourcing?
Yeah. It was deal sourcing, doing due diligence, running the meetings. But also with the Utah Angels at the time, there's a life cycle to an angel investor. And so once they get it past a certain age, they recognize that every dollar they invest, they're not going to see. So unless they're investing for posterity reasons, most self-select out. And I felt many of those individuals at that time either had burnt up their capital, didn't like the risk, or were of the age that they just knew they wouldn't get as many wins. And so the group became very active or inactive.
One thing I remember is I went to the Park City Angels once.
Much more active.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of their money was from biomedical stuff and real estate, right? But Utah Angels seem to have a little more mixed with more tech and stuff like that. Is that right?
Yeah. And then a lot of the VCs would Paul Alstrom would come because he was at VSpring and Alta Ventures. Greg Warnock would show up from Mercado.
That's big, yeah.
But they didn't have at that point an appetite for risk.
Yeah.
Or if they were doing these angel deals, they would never come to the group and they would just do one-offs.
Right, which makes most sense. I remember going to Park City Angels and then Salt Lake Angels. Yeah, most of the companies I were pitching, they were very early stage. Or pre-revenue or even at the conceptual stage versus, they're probably being reached out to directly if they have revenue-based companies going seed or pre-seed, stuff like that.
It's been crazy to see the valuation changes. Because at the time when companies would come, even if they had some traction, the founders had quit, the pre-money valuation would be $1 million. And if it got to the 2 million number, these investors would freak out.
Why is that? Just
I think it just at that
they
point,
just thought it was overvalued.
Just overvalued. And now it's very common to see those same type of companies, the pre-money or post-money being 5 to 10 million.
Yeah. Yeah, and the world that I'm used to is all multiples of EBITDA, and I feel like that's become more common in other spaces too, because it's hardware businesses, especially when I'm looking at decks and P&Ls and stuff to do my own small angel investing. It's the way they value them is so different than tech companies. So then when people come and they're like, this is my valuation, it's 4x the revenue I did last year or whatever. It's I don't know if that's how it works. If or I've seen people try to get a 10x their revenue on a hardware company. It's no, it's a completely different space. It's not a tech company.
SaaS is different. I have a lot of respect for you guys in the hardware space because it's just so cash intensive.
Yeah,
and your margins aren't as big.
Yeah, but it's but it also shows their ability to operate a business by how healthy they keep their P&L, month after month. And it's you could just tell so much just looking at a P&L, so quickly, versus, just top line revenue and basing on that. I don't care about your revenue. I care about your EBITDA, because you could be a $1 million business with a 20% EBITDA, or you could be a $10 million business with a 4% EBITDA. You know what I mean? And it's just Yeah, just different. But so then what did you do at Silicon Slopes? Is this the same Silicon Slopes? Didn't it kind of like evolve, or is it,
So
so this is the early stages of it?
Silicon Slopes, in my mind, went through like 3 phases.
Mm-hmm.
There was the first phase when Josh James and Mark Adams was there, and it was mainly a website and the poster. And then Omniture got acquired by Adobe, and Adobe was going to shut it down. And then John Richards comes back in the picture again because there was a online community called, I think it was BYU Island, where a bunch of developers were there. And he says, hey, and John Richards posted about it, said, does anyone want it? And I saw that as part of my portfolio. I'm like, here, I could have a media company. I could have Boom Startup. I've got the Utah Angels. That would give me a lot of exposure. So him and I then went to Adobe. We got Adobe to give us the asset for free, put it in a Utah nonprofit. And then there was $29,000 left in the bank. We convinced them to just give that because it was initially part of building the community anyways and donations. And then we started running with it. And then Josh James came on the board. He agreed to cover my salary as part of the sponsorship. And that was tricky. And maybe if we look at founders' notes, again, it's about aligning incentives with the people that you're working with. And Mark Adams before me, maybe I shouldn't say this, but he talked about Silicon Slopes being the redheaded stepchild, that Josh James had immense intentions for it. But when, push came to shove, it got pushed to the last item on the agenda. And the same thing happened with me. Is like that first year or two, because Josh James was on the board, I couldn't do things without him signing off. And then you're just stuck in a position where you're powerless. And so one of the things that John Richards taught me that's very important to me today, even I've learned with all the clients we're with, is never take a position of leadership or responsibility unless you're given the tasks and the ability to accomplish those. And so then, like, as an example, with one of the clients we work with, we do a lot of their software development. We came to them and threatened to quit one day just because if they don't give us the ability to leave, we're just going to burn their money and they're going to be upset in the long run. And that lesson's been super valuable throughout my entire career. You're there to deliver results and you need to be enabled. And if someone's not going to enable you, you need to learn how to self-select out and eject.
Yeah, that's great. We definitely put a lot of thought into these field notes before coming in. That's great. I still don't understand, how does Silicon Slopes make money now?
So Silicon Slopes now, there was another executive director after I left,
but
it runs off just
Clint
sponsorships.
Betts
Clint Betts runs it. I don't know what their P&L looks like.
Because he's a lot of cool stuff going on too with his
CO.com.
CO.com. That's his new one. And then he has Beehive VC. Is that him as well?
He, I believe, is an advisor
part
there.
Of it. Yeah.
But I'm not sure. I think it's a limited advisor.
Yeah, because I've been down to I've seen their facility and stuff. They have a good podcast set up with their cameras and whatnot. You use
not as nice as this one.
You don't think so? They have way better cameras, at least.
Their room's smaller though.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is just my office with a couple cameras.
This feels more comfortable with his. You're sitting across this table that's really high.
Yeah, I wanted to be like, chill and comfortable.
And maybe that's your personality.
Yeah.
But it feels more chill than that room did.
Yeah, I've always, I mean, obviously the big event they do every year is like a big deal, and that's well put together, and it seems to continue to get bigger and bigger. It's definitely more tech and SaaS focused, so I don't get too involved with it, but I do like going and seeing some of the stuff they've got going on. And I'm guessing that's a revenue generator for them, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think typically the media is if you look at even TechCrunch, I'm assuming the media and all the ads that they display on the site is kind of their break-even model, and their profit comes out of their large events that they can do.
Yeah, so that makes sense. And then a lot of them seem to have other things on the side. People that work at Silicon Slopes, like Clint, obviously. And then what's the Meat and Potatoes podcast?
That's part of Silicon Slopes.
That's what I thought. So it's like one of their, what's his name that runs that?
Is it Garrett?
I think it's Garrett, yeah. Because I remember Garrett was at Church and State back in the day. That would have been similar time frame to when you were at like Boom Startup then. Yeah, so then it looks like from there you started your first business officially.
Yeah, the first business,
Pantheon
Motion. We had 3 DBAs: dental motion, chiropractic motion, and veterinary motion. I was not smart enough at the time to understand true client pain points and revenue opportunities. But what we were doing is, one of the members of the Utah Angels, Kimball Weirg, was the founder of Dentrix. And he had talked often about it was time to create a Dentrix version in the cloud. And so my thought is, hey, if I can go sell to a bunch of these small practices, if I can get an iPad on the desk that we were doing a podium-like survey, it will show to investors I know how to sell to the space, that I can build a sales team, and then we can start integrating with their current applications, and then one day expand into the cloud and raise a few $1 million. So that was kind of the thought there. We learned a lot from it. I think in the first year we did like 100,000 to 200,000 in revenue, but it was just so much work. And we learned that those like SMBs were just so hard and difficult to serve that we then made a pivot into Tiny Torch.
Okay. So that's like a spin out of that then. Okay.
Where we said, at the point, it's kind of funny. We said, what's working well and what's not working well. And I wasn't sharp enough as a founder at the time to realize that people's real pain point was online reviews. What we did is we pivoted to Tiny Torch, which was it was kind of like a Hootsuite, but we built a digital asset management tool behind it so that the community could share and collaborate with posts. And that got to about $1 million in revenue. And then Facebook killed it in response to the whole Cambridge Analytica stuff.
So
privacy, security
now when
stuff.
you're building these, you're building the software side. Are you a coder? Do you have coding background or the ability to code? Or is that when you started coding and doing software development in India?
I'm more of a product owner. So when we were doing Tiny Torch, we had a US team and one of our sales reps, kind of like an outsourced sales rep, said, hey, Mary Kay wants to be a customer. This is what they want, but they need SOC 2 compliance. They need an iOS app. They need an Android app. And with our US team and the revenue we had at the time, which was like 10, 15,000 in revenue, there was no way we could go build out all these other aspects. And I felt that, again, the angels in the state of Utah wouldn't fund the model. But I'm like, if I went to India, I could self-fund. Brad Pace, one of my really good friends and mentors, he had been working with a couple of different shops overseas. And so he says, hey, John, he'd hit me up a few times because he says, if you can do this, you could expand and grow so much more quickly.
Right.
And so
you had basically figured out what your current model is today on your own project. Which is I've seen that happen pretty often. It makes a lot of sense. It's kind of like what Scott did with Vodo. Did you hear about that company?
Oh, I know what Vodo. The
app that he made.
Photo app.
So he made it where it's like you post 4 pictures and people could vote on it. It's like Instagram style. But at the end of the day, what he learned from that was how to use small Instagram influencers to promote their app. And he was paying these 15-year-old kids that had hundreds of thousands of followers. He'd pay them $100 to post their app. Obviously today that landscape has changed. And then that's when he actually spun out and shut down Vodo and started Instafluence and then sold that. But it's that's like being okay to pivot, which is like a common field note that everybody brings up. But it's like sometimes when you're building your business, you see an opportunity because you're forced to use something or forced to do something a certain way that you actually find out is the business model that would work. And that sounds like what happened with Codebase, right?
Yeah, I feel like that if you're playing in the sandbox long enough, you either get lucky or you just you learn as you go.
Yeah. So you started Codebase early on as well, 2012.
No, Codebase was 2018.
Oh, okay.
March of 2018. So what had happened is, I think in 2017, so our app was growing. We landed Mary Kay as a client. As we were self-funded, no venture funding. At the time, we were doing about between 30 and 40,000 a month in revenue. And I'm like, we've made it. If we can get to 50 to 100,000 and then raise, our cap table will look very healthy. We'll have a much better business. And then one day, the whole app just turned off. We had a huge reliance on Facebook. And Facebook, in response to the security issues around Cambridge Analytica, just turned off our business. We just crashed overnight.
That's crazy.
And then they published the blog post the next day. And I've always been frustrated still. It's that the issues at hand were security around your gender, around political affiliation, and your religious affiliation. And by design, we never touched any of those APIs. But Facebook came through and just shut everything down. At that point, I'm like, oh, crap, I'm unemployed.
Yeah.
I had a lot of depression.
Oh.
I felt like as a founder, I was worthless, wasted the last few years of my life. I had a buddy at Lucidchart and I was like, hey, can you get me a job here? And he looked at me, he's like, I don't know where to put you. He's like, you're not a sales, you've done sales, but you're not a sales guy. You've done analytics, but you're not an analytics guy. You've done you're a product manager, but that's not what you've done for the last 8 years. This is who Luce is hiring. And at that point, for 6 months, I just kind of wandered around because I'm like, I don't know what to do with my life next.
Yeah. So you're
And
like
that's when Codebase was born.
Like a limbo.
Like shell shock's probably more like it.
Yeah. So then you basically were forced to shut down Tiny Torch then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a healthy business. It was growing well. But I think its critical flaw was, it was reliant upon one third-party business that we had no control over what they did or didn't do.
Yeah. I mean, Facebook has done that. I've seen like our ad account have like, we post an ad of like someone's leg stepping onto one of our bath mats, and it shows from like knee down or below the knee down, right? And then they shut the whole ad account down, saying it's like sexual, this, that, and the other. And it's like, what the hell? Like that's like 60% of our revenue is relying on it.
Your revenue goes down, then you have to do layoffs.
And we have to, we didn't, I mean, thankfully we would get it fixed.
Some people didn't.
So we get it fixed in a couple days, but, it's because, we were spending enough with them that we had enough of an account representative that would actually do something for us instead of like a robot that's like, chit-chatting us on but yeah, I just remember how scary that was.
But you got lucky because there's several companies that happened to and they went under.
Or you have to start over, right? You have to recapture your data, rebuild your ad sets, and then let them relearn. And
nobody kills the business. If you were down for a couple days,
momentum.
If you could not run ads in that business for 14 to 28 days, it might have just killed the business.
Yeah, it's miserable, and you can't solely rely on Google ads.
I think that's the big takeaway I've learned is that no matter what I do, I need to make sure that there's not a single point of failure.
Yeah. All the eggs in that basket, which is similar to why we're like, doing Pinterest ads, and we're looking at doing TikTok and growing that side of our ads more. Yeah. Diversifying our ad channels. Also, we use a Mountain. Have you heard of that? It's like basically like self-service commercial placement.
Okay.
TV commercials. And that's kind of been pretty interesting to experiment with as well.
Okay.
But yeah. It's like you have to diversify it. So yeah, then you start Codebase out of pretty much rage and depression for what gave you that idea, and then how did that all get going?
So that idea came from Derek Hall. He's a VC, and then now he's a founder in Brazil, running a company. He's running 2 companies down there, and he's like, John, why don't you start a dev shop? And John Richards had always taught me that service-based businesses were evil.
Instant cash flow. What are you talking about?
I know. So at the time, I'm like, I don't know what to do. He's like, John, you have all these connections with India.
Yeah.
You can demonstrate you've had a need. People have come to you and asked for you to build their products, and you've turned them down.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, but it's a service business.
Not scalable. It's not. It's like not. I mean, it's scalable to a point, but it's the end of the day. It's like instant cash flow.
It's instant cash flow.
And it's very sustainable.
So at that point, my first 2 clients at Codebase were former clients of Tiny Torch. We had Jamberry. They did nail wraps.
I remember Jamberry.
They were clients. So the
Utah company,
like the Jennifer Harmon, like the CMO, was like the first person who took a chance on us. Said, "Hey, John, help us at the new company I'm with." Jared Richards came again, said, "Hey, we need to go build a team of like 3 or 4 people. Will you help us do that?" And then we've just been running with them ever since.
That's great. And you said you have like 40 team members over there, or you've placed 40.
We have roughly about 40 full-time equivalents at Codebase.
And it's just, the model was interesting when you explained it, how you're basically helping companies domestically hire and position a resource in India for software development. Which is smart because they manage them, right? Yeah,
so they manage them, and then I'll come through and I basically babysit both sides, and I make sure that they're doing best practices and procedures. And I feel like when people mess up in India, there's a couple reasons I feel like they mess up. Is I feel like they go too cheap. They're like, hey, we want to save money, so they go to the bottom of the barrel. I think there's a lot of also things that outsourcing companies have done as tricks as time has gone on to make more money, which has created a very negative experience. And so we've built a system to get rid of all of that.
Is that a software platform that you built?
Not a software, just policy. So like a lot of the outsourcing companies that you work with that are US based actually just have a partnership or an affiliation or a relationship with an overseas group.
Yeah.
Whereas we have our own entity, so we control the entire supply chain the entire way through. So we can't have someone twist us or pull a dev from, last minute.
Yeah.
I think there's other things that we do that are just very different. When I've outsourced, I've had a lot of people just swap devs on me last minute.
Mm-hmm.
Surprise. And you know what's happening? They're putting them on a more profitable project.
Mm-hmm.
That happens a lot. Or they do a lot of these tricks where they give you this average blended rate. So they'll give you a really senior dev and then a bunch of junior devs. And then they hope you can blend it together. And I'm a big believer, if we look at another like field note, Zach Oates gave me this one. It's like, you pay for what you get or you get what you pay for.
Yeah.
And so when we've done it, we're just trying to find really good individuals, much more senior, much more experienced. And that makes for a very different experience.
Zach Oates, ovation. Yeah, he's a cool guy.
Very cool guy. You need to have him on the podcast.
I want to. Yeah, he. I've had lunch with him before. He's super sharp, and Ovation seems to be doing pretty well. Is he a client then, or you just know him?
Just friends. He was actually with me at Dental Motion. We call it Dental Mofo. Looking back on it,
that's good. What's the future of Codebase?
My goal is to grow it to 1,000, 2,000 developers.
Oh wow, which is very doable. And are you starting to branch out of Utah for clientele? Do you have a good spread of clients outside of the state, or?
Yeah, we've got clients. A lot of them are Utah based, but they go as far as Missouri.
Okay. Where do you find them? Trade shows or?
Historically, they've just found us. So as we've grown Codebase, and I go to India roughly on average, probably 1 out of every 3 months.
Okay.
And so people just see me there, and that's been kind of like our unique value prop.
Yeah.
They see me here, they see me there.
It's like that with me in China. Yeah. It helps where they just see you as boots in the ground.
So in most instances, every time I say, hey, I need to start putting on my sales hat, the next referral comes in. I'll get 3 referrals, close 1. And then my rule is never take more than 1 client every quarter.
Okay. So you could really make sure quality control is good. Yeah. Because your clients are more consistent cash flow and pretty long term.
I look at it as Codebase as I'm just building a perpetuity.
Yeah. Because they're going to, like all software companies need development constantly to continue to evolve and grow. So they're always going to need that resource there for them.
Yeah. And then build the relationship. All of our clients have been with us, except the ones that like went out of business. Like sometimes like a company just can't get funding and they need more funding. Right. Outside of that, we haven't ever lost a client.
That's great. What was the first time then you went to India and started like tapping into that side of things?
I think it was January of 2017 is the first time.
Yeah.
So again, John Richards had made a comment from Dave Bateman that India only works if you've got boots on the ground. And so in my mind, I'm like, well, if I hire my first developer, I need to go to India. And so I was on the plane, within 30 days.
Okay.
And then that first year I went to India about 4 times. And then I got to the point where I was spending roughly half my time in India and then half my time here.
Okay. Well, and you met your wife out there as well, right? So you've got roots now in India pretty much, which is cool.
Yep. She's from Agra. That's where the Taj Mahal is at.
Cool. Is that where your office is nearby then, or?
No, we're on the other side of the country in Pune. So what would happen is, as I would go in and out of Pune, I would fly out of Mumbai, and my plane would fly right over her house. So one of those days, we just right swiped on Bumble, and then
oh no way,
we matched, and then started dating.
Bumble's big in India as well.
I don't know how big it is or was, but that's how I found her.
Well, that's cool. That's a good story. Then how long ago did she move here with you?
She came here about 2 years. So her idea is, it was during COVID. She's like, it was her second time here. Then while she was here, we decided to get married.
Yeah.
She's then, hey, I'm going to stay. And then we applied for her green card. And then she got her green card in December.
That's exciting. So then when you go back, does she go with you? And
so she's there on her first trip now. So I wanted her to be able to go back and visit her friends and family. Yeah. And so we just blocked off like a 2 to 3 month window so she can just go and rekindle those relationships.
So really in the US, you don't have any team members, do you?
For the most part, it's me and Gunjan that run it. We've got David Haney out of Texas. He used to manage a team of 1,200 IT professionals.
Wow.
If you look at like another field note, no matter what I'm doing, I'm always trying to find someone who's at least 10, who's done something 10 times bigger than I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I try to find ways to suck them in so I don't make similar mistakes.
One thing I always train, management and team members when like they're hiring a resource, it's like, don't be afraid to like hire up from you. You know what I mean? Versus sometimes they're, like people's like their egos get in the way and they hire someone lower in fear of what happens to their position or them, position in the company when it's like, what goes longer is one, making smart decisions and loyalty versus, hiring someone lower to help make you look better or whatever. It's like, that doesn't help the company versus find someone that might be more senior than you. And I think that's just a smart way to build and grow, because you're not only building out, you're building up. But
I married up, so that helps too.
Yeah, I think so. I did too as well. I think that's always smart.
We were playing a memory game once in Mumbai with our friends. I'm like, man, this girl has a much smarter memory recall than I do. I found that I was very impressed by that.
Yeah, my wife is very analytical and she plans far ahead, and she's very organized and type A, and I'm definitely like not that. So she balances me out. I'm too ADHD for that.
That's good. My wife hates me because I'll look at all the opportunities on my plate and then I'll execute like last minute.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
procrastinate.
There's 20 opportunities. This is the best one now, and then go. So she's the one who wants to like plan and execute.
So you're doing do you work mostly at nighttime then?
I'm more of a nocturnal person. So like my favorite part is like, I'll like get up, do lunch meetings, I'll go home, have like me time midday. And then like, I like to start, clock in at like 8:00 at night.
Yeah.
And then just connect and overlap.
Well, you have less, I guess, you're communicating with the Indian side of things, but you're not getting bombarded with US conversations and whatnot.
So that's
the
trick
pretty
now.
Productive.
Most clients have morning calls. And I used to be on all those calls until we hired a director of operations. And so now then I'm just selectively, I try to be on a client call like once or twice a month just to like listen in. Is the tone right? Is the cadence right? Is there frustration? Are there gaps? And then if there are, then I fly in.
That's usually how, I don't really go into client meetings unless there's like a fire or something, or they feel like they need me to like push them to the finish line or something like that. But
yeah, I do occasional checks. I think the call we had last night with the team is we're augmented with another team, and it's been challenging because that team is not as technically advanced as my team. And so instinctively, their goal has been to just fight or not share information. And so in that case, I've had to do a lot of coaching with the business owners and them, because we need those individuals. We can't replace them. We don't want to replace them, but like they have to realize that their jobs are safe and that this is the new team dynamic and like what success is. And I remember the first time they were talking, they didn't know what a sprint was. And I went to the founder and I'm like, or the owner, and I'm like, they don't know what a sprint is. And I'm like, no, they have to know. Well, it turns out they didn't know. So and then it's teaching them on like those best practices and then so learning that discipline.
Put it on your consulting hat there. Here's something that I've had to spend a lot of time at with my China office is understanding the workplace culture and the differences between US and then China, obviously. I'm sure you've had to deal with the same thing in India. Like, what are some of those big things that you've learned with dealing with Indian culture? Because one thing I know with Chinese culture, there's very direct, and they don't mean to offend people, and they'll say something that will offend someone, but it's not intentional, for example. And it kind of takes time for you to like figure out like, oh, this is what they actually meant. And so what have you picked up on, and what are the big things that you've learned that is a huge difference that affects day by day?
Yeah. So I think the biggest challenge that people have with India is that Indians were trained under the British rule that it was better to say yes to like a British officer than to say no and not deliver. So if they said, hey, can you build this bridge in 2 years? If it would take 3 years, you don't say no, it's going to take 3 years. You would just say yes, and then you'd miss the deadlines. With India's younger generations, that's not nearly a problem as it was with the older generations. But one of the things we focus a lot internally is just proper communication, managing up, setting clear expectations would be probably the biggest difference with India. I know I've never done this. I've wanted to take my developers and put them in a boxing ring and give them a pair of boxing gloves and have them hit me like, the foreigner or the outsider, to teach them that it's totally acceptable and to like rewire their brains that it's okay to push back. It's okay to you're not challenging authority, but to provide constructive feedback.
So then what, do you pad timelines to prevent that ever then, or feel like you have to pad timelines knowing that could happen?
With any software developer, you need to pad timelines for the things you don't know. Because unless you're doing something repetitive, like say Salesforce software development, that you're just doing tasks again and again and again and again,
Mm-hmm.
You know, the innate nature of software development is you're always doing something you've never done before.
Mm-hmm.
So it's learning proper communication, or if the deadline's going to change, how do we communicate that? So like that's one of the things that David Haney did
Mm-hmm.
with our teams this last week is we took them through 7 habits of highly effective people, and specifically communicating and learning how to communicate up.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, the estimate was 2 months. Hey, we think it's 3 months, and these are the reasons why.
Mm-hmm.
And doing that early rather than late, or surprising someone.
Totally. Yeah, buying time is not as difficult as people think.
Mm-hmm.
Or like a client's not going to be as disappointed if you're taking 2 weeks, but the product is going to be the level they expect it to be at.
Mm-hmm.
You know, have you had instances then where it has been just massively late and you're like, damn, I should have done something sooner that caused you to like know or understand that part of their culture?
I don't think so, because usually especially in the early days, I was very hands-on, and now those team members are now teaching other team members.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's more of just the areas I get involved in now is not really with that, but just when clients don't know how to manage their own dev teams.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, here's 2-week sprints. Here's and this is what we talked about with one of them. Are you doing the check-ins? You know, are you doing like the sprint planning together? Are they, doing, post-mortem for every sprint?
Mm-hmm.
Is each person clearly stating what their responsibility is, and are they accepting it? So then if it does or doesn't happen, then they can be held accountable. And if they know they're accountable, then that changes output.
So here's another thing that I'm curious about, because just like you, when you spend that much time in the other culture, you like really get to know it and you immerse yourself in it, and you learn to respect different parts of it and kind of like embrace it. And, I like to lean into it and do their lunch processes, their tea time and stuff like that. And like, it's, I enjoy it. What about like the in-office culture side of things? You know what I mean? Like, do you have an office there that they work at, or is everybody pretty much remote?
Right now, people are remote, and we're starting to push people back in.
Yeah, because I'm curious,
in a friendly manner.
Because think about my office, the culture here is very laid back. People like to be here. Like we made the decision to come back when we could after the whole COVID stuff, where in the reviews, like when we were checking in with everybody's like, I want to be back in the office. I miss the collaboration. I miss being able to turn to the side and talk to so on and so forth. And, like we're big on like the spending time on Friday lunches and, celebrating birthdays, doing all that type of stuff. But it's like, I'm always curious. And when my team from China was here visiting last time, like we exposed them to all that, and it was just mind blowing to them. Where it was, when I'm there, it's like, everybody's head down, grinding it out. The interesting thing is like, for example, nap time every day at lunch.
Okay.
It's like they stay often till 7, 8 p.m. That's like normal for them throughout the week, which, here we are like at 5 o'clock, pretty much everybody leaves, which is like cool with me, like work-life balance. Like, what are some of those things that you see over there just being drastically different? Like the fact that I come home back from lunch at my China office and the lights are off and everybody's sleeping. And it's just like, that's so different from what we experience here.
I don't know. I feel like with Indian outsourcing development, they've worked with so many U.S. clients that I don't think the shock is as big. I think the more cultural shock happens when they come here, and the culture shock is people aren't honking all the time while they're driving, and the roads are smoother. And in India, if you're waiting in a line or a queue, no one does that. We're here, everyone does that.
What do they do in lines then? Do they just plow to the front?
It's just this. I mean, I would just call it as organized chaos. It's like it's different when you're driving. They don't really care if there's a red light. I mean, they do and they don't. It's more of, in India, things go slower, but you feel like you're constantly moving. Where here, you're moving fast, stopping at a light, waiting for 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Going again.
How efficient is that actually?
Where it's just constantly just a flow of traffic.
I've noticed like in Europe, like in Germany, I drove around quite a bit there, and I just remembered like there wasn't really stop and go traffic. Everybody kept moving at a 40 mile an hour pace or whatever. And then, like here it is that everybody stops and goes. And in China, driving around or riding around, I haven't driven in China. I've just been in a passenger, but I would always notice like cars just like freaking pull out. And, they'll basically just block you from going. And here in America, you'd be like, what the hell are you doing? Like rip on the horn and stuff. But No, they just like slow down, like let them in.
Okay.
Like, yeah, okay, let's pull out. So then you think when someone from China coming to the US to drive and they go to pull out, everybody thinks, oh, they're such terrible drivers. But at the end of the day, that's how they drive in China. And I can't tell you, like, I was noticing, I just see no accidents over there. Like, I think out of all the times I've been there, there's only been one time that I've seen like a wreck after it happened. Whereas here, they're all over the place because people are on their phones and whatnot. And it's just so, that's one of those things that I like noticed that stood out to me quite a bit.
I feel like India has more fender benders. So I've been in 4 or 5 like fender bender accidents.
Just like bumping the person in front of them. Yeah.
It puts a dimple in the bumper. But here it's like you get in an accident, your car's wrecked.
Yeah. Here they have way harder hitting. Everybody's going way too fast. So let's go through the summary of some of those field notes you have written down.
Okay. The first one is like you pay for what you get or you get what you pay for. I don't
talk about that a bit.
I just think so many people try to go cheap and they don't understand what happens.
Yeah.
Or
they don't understand the complexity of the process they're paying for.
Right. Or it's like today, one of the client's devs has a counter offer and the client says, we can't pay that. That's too much. But if they think about the amount of time and money to find a new dev, to train that new dev, people are sometimes, they don't realize there's these other inherent costs.
Yeah. People are the same way with product development and like engineering. They're like, oh, I just need to make a prototype. And it's like, well, you have to do the full design process and engineering and, prototypes. You don't just make one and it works. You might have to make 3 or 4 before you get it dialed. And, they're like, oh, I'll just have like my cousin do this or whatever. And then it's just, at the end of the day, we've seen a lot of those situations where they have that mindset where they end up just coming back to us anyway, and we have to start from scratch and do it the right way from the beginning.
Yeah, I see a lot of those. They'll go the cheap route, and then about 12 months later, they show up fairly consistently.
Yeah, and they're like, "Well, that didn't work out, so let's start over."
It's one of those self-fulfilling prophecies. It's like, "Hey, this is what's going to happen if you go this route. We support you, but this is what you're dealing with."
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, it's the same with buying a product. If you're going to buy the cheap product from Amazon, it's probably not going to last as long. And that's why a big thing with our company is we would prefer to build a higher quality, better product that is more intentional. So the consumer that buys it gets it and uses it for a very long time. And it becomes, something of quality versus making a high volume, cheap Amazon stuff, So what is the second one?
The second one is, as a leader, lead the team in setting really good goals. I think a lot of times we don't put deadlines in and we hope things will happen when they happen. And as I look back in my career, that's one of the things I'd probably be more proactive about. If I could go back and mentor myself, what's the goal for this month or this quarter? How can we all get buy-in? How can we all execute? Instead of just kind of like, well, here's my objectives. And when we get there, we get there.
Yeah, like setting we do quarterly KPIs and yeah, it makes it easier to track. We use Asana for project management, but it's like nice to go through a list of KPIs and objectives and just see clearly if it's like on track, not on track, or done, and it's easy to gauge the health of your execution, and if you don't do that, and you just don't know your performance, or your team's performance. So that's a good one.
I think another thing is, and this is something we do really a lot at Codebase internally, is I'm very ADD. I always want to try new things. And it's always, write down, this is, I think, Napoleon's principle. It's write down everything you want to do, you think it's important, identifying those top 3, and then not only just only do those top 3, literally cross everything out on your list. And because I think over the last year at Codebase, we've been building a management team. I've been learning how to delegate. I tend to say, where's the fire, the opportunity? And I tend not to get my personal things off the list. And so our new goal is, if it's important enough to start, it's important enough to finish. And then it's okay to have, sometimes downtime as long as you're focused and you get those things done.
Yeah, or you're setting up like the timeline of when you're going to pick it back up, or when I complete this task, I'm going to pick this back up or whatever. Yeah, those are good things. Even personally, What else?
This is something that Jon Bradshaw taught me once. It's you make or break your career between 3 and 5 on a Friday afternoon. So this is very employee focused.
Yeah.
But it's one of those mantras that's been with me my entire life. It's really easy to check out early mentally. Like you might still be there physically, but to check out.
Definitely.
And it's always been, it's that last, like I did track in high school and in college.
Mm-hmm.
And in track, it's like when you hit your deadline, you're still like sprinting towards the finish line.
Yeah.
You put everything in where I feel like in corporate life, we're like, hey, there's an hour before I go. How can I look busy versus how can I actually get stuff done?
Mm-hmm. Well, and that makes the start of the following week better.
Mm-hmm.
Because then you go and feel like, and you could also like have a better weekend knowing that you've completed those tasks, right? So it's probably better just mindset wise to do it that way.
I think another one, it's easier to chase busy work as a founder versus really doing the hard tasks that are uncomfortable to do.
Mm-hmm. Like what? Give me an example. What would you consider that?
What would be a good example? I mean, if you have to have a hard discussion with an employee, right? Sometimes it's easier to say, it's not important. It's like when you clean the house, right?
Yeah.
When you're in school, am I going to do my homework or clean the house? Oh, I'm going to clean the house. Mm-hmm. When really it's that hard task. And in business, there's hard tasks all the time.
Yeah. Like
do I want to do sales or do I want to go put a strategy guide together?
Yeah.
Do I want to go do 100 phone calls or follow up with these people? Mm-hmm. Or do I want to think about the next podcast we can launch?
Yeah.
It's really easy to get distracted and not really do those core critical things that make or break people.
Yeah. And I feel like too, once you actually get started on any task, then you just got to lean into that momentum, which can be hard to do
and
just to get started.
Cross the finish line.
Yeah. Anything you want to leave behind about the Venture Capital podcast? Like how often do you launch episodes and where do they find it?
So go to venturecapital.fm. The goal of the podcast is right now we're just going through like the top 200 most commonly asked questions.
Okay. That's a good one.
Peter and I face off and then we have our list of bullet points beforehand and then it's about a 20-minute episode. So it'll be like, what is, how to get a job at a VC firm. Mm-hmm. What are current valuations for seed or pre-seed deals? What should my growth rate be if I'm looking to fundraise? And then we're going through those, trying to provide as much data and then just trying to be as transparent as possible.
Mm-hmm. When you're recording episodes like that, are you guys doing a good bit of research and like talking to people that are like have jobs at venture capital groups and stuff like that? Or are you just going off your own experiences?
A lot of it's off of our own experience. Like we'll grab some research in advance, but a lot of it's, Peter Harris is always looking at deals. Mm-hmm. So we can say right now, these are the markdowns that are happening. So for example, startup valuations have taken a huge hit. And some of these companies are taking hits by like 90% of their prior valuations. Even Stripe, that's a company that should go public, that has real revenue. They just raised $6.2 billion, or was it 6.5 billion dollars, and their valuation was a 50% markdown from the prior raise.
Oh, wow. And did they announce why that was, or
it's just access to capital? Yeah. I mean, I don't know if they shared their actual growth rates. I imagine Stripe's still growing and doing great things. And they're a core part of like the internet, payment structure. Mm-hmm. But just the valuations have just changed. Interest rates go up, valuations drop. Cash is less accessible, valuations drop.
Yeah. And I'm applying for a line of credit for inventory for Durai right now. And I haven't seen what the rates are going to be, but I'm curious to see what they're going to be like. I'm kind of nervous about it.
What are you anticipating?
I don't know. I mean, like a line of credit, some of the ones that I looked at in the past were like 1.5 or so. So I don't know where it's going to end up from there, which is honestly not that bad because it's like we tap into it for maybe like a month at a time for a PO and pay it off with the sales from the previous order anyway, because we try to keep it consistently stocked, but we'll see. So thanks for coming on and,
Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, those are solid field notes.
It was stressful because I know you had just interviewed Kirk Wiemet.
Yeah.
And he's much, like if you're going to listen to an episode, listen to that episode.
No, it's a good. I get so much out of these episodes, and every single entrepreneur is so different because they're going through different things, like hearing. And it's the good thing about chatting with you, which is cool, is I don't get to talk to many other founders that have built something in another country and have to understand like the cultural side of things and, like the travel and then, the time difference, like staying up late at night and stuff like that. Every single interview adds something different or different piece of value. So,
And you're a good interviewer, so
thank you. I appreciate it.
I was nervous because I don't generally view myself as a talker.
Yeah. Well, and you have a podcast, so.
But the podcast is Peter Talks, and I ask like 20 questions, and then I'll give him a couple jabs.
Yeah, that's fun though.
It's not me talking about VC for an hour. It's Peter talking and saying, hey, Peter, what about this point?
So it's more fast-paced.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you have guests on, how do those work? How do you do that style of interview?
So we've only tried that once.
And that's with Scott?
With Scott Paul. Okay. So we did 3 episodes with him as a test. I want to start doing more of that because then you're coordinating 3 different schedules: my schedule, Peter's schedule, and the guest schedule.
Yeah. Well, that's great. So we'll post all the links and stuff so people can go give it a listen and check it out. So
awesome. I appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. So that was a great episode. Thank you, Jon, for joining me in our conversation after our lunch. I'm glad that you were able to come up so soon and interview with me. It's always great to connect with other founders that have built service businesses, especially one that has built a service business that leverages skill sets from another country that has a different culture. It's always good to compare and understand what he's learned and what I have learned and figure out how we can do what we do better. Some very well thought out field notes. I appreciate the effort going into it. One thing that I definitely agree with, which I have learned the hard way, is that every founder, partner, co-founder, they got to be on the same mindset, wavelength, ideally are pre-aligning themselves with their intentions before decisions happens and big changes happen, or before you start diving into building and growing your business. Best way to do that, obviously, is with communication. But sometimes when you do communicate and figure that out, you realize that you're not in alignment and it's not worth moving forward together. Definitely a big one that applies to any type of business, whether it's a direct-to-consumer brand, it's a service business, it's a brick and mortar, whatever it is. Definitely do not limit yourself to a single point of failure. If that single point does collapse, then the rest of your stuff collapses. You got to figure out how to split that into as many points as you can. Totally agree with that. That's like, for example, with a direct-to-consumer brand, if you're relying on one ad channel, you got to focus on diversifying, especially if it's like Meta, right? If you're only doing Meta ads, you better quickly add Pinterest and YouTube and Google and whatever other ad channels you could dip into so you diversify. I like to do it with factories, for example, especially when a product's volume gets to a certain point. I like to diversify and have multiple suppliers that I could buy the same product through, just to prevent if something happens to one of the factories, it collapses, whatever, or they end up burning you and you don't want to work with them anymore because of something they did. The fact that you could quickly switch over to another factory will prevent that from being a point of issue. So that applies in so many different ways in business. Very valuable field note. Definitely a big point, especially being in a service industry where we offer a pretty premium and expensive service. You do get what you pay for. I can't tell you how many times people have come to me with a project. We give them the quote, we tell them how much it's going to cost. They say, oh, that's too expensive. They go and get scrappy and try to find another way to do it. And it's happened many times where they end up coming back to us because they're either piecemealing things together and the service offering's not quality, the management's not quality, the output is not what they expected because they're kind of doing shortcuts. And a lot of times just because of the not necessarily understanding the complexity of what they're doing and what they're outsourcing to you. At the end of the day, you do get what you pay for. And it's worth, depending on what you're doing, a lot of times it can be worth paying the premium for the service that you need or the product that you need, obviously. Higher quality products obviously going to cost more money, like these mic stands. I got cheap ones and they suck and I'm thinking about replacing them. They flop down and, can't tell you how many times this happens. So, good example. When you're looking to bring someone on to a new business, Jon recommends to find someone that is doing something 10 times bigger than them so they can learn from them. I agree with that. I mean, it's always valuable to hire up, especially if you can afford it. If you bring on someone that's extremely experienced or has done the rounds. A lot of times they're going to end up being worth the money of bringing on that more expensive resource in-house for if you're hiring, for a high-end role. They'll bring a lot of value to the business. You'll learn from them. They'll end up shaping how you approach things because they're going to have insight that they wouldn't have had, or they've been at businesses that do things a way that works really well that you wouldn't see otherwise because maybe you didn't have that same exposure or you worked in smaller businesses or whatever that might be. I think it's definitely a good way to look at things when you're hiring is to try to hire up. And I like to train that to my team too when they're hiring team members. Instead of looking to hire someone underneath them that might not have as much experience, maybe it is worth hiring someone that has that more experience so they can learn from them. And that makes you a better leader, I think, too, where you realize, I should hire that more experienced person and not feel threatened and let the ego go when making that decision, because at the end of the day, that decision down the road will be more valuable for you and the company. Really good field note that's a standard, I think, is when you're leading, set really good goals, put a lot of thought and effort to them, and paint that path towards them. And then setting those deadlines and goals end up being beneficial for that positive growth. So, not setting a goal that's way astronomical and big to where everybody fails, but also not setting it too small where you hit it too easily and then you get relaxed after the fact that you hit it. I think it's good to find a happy medium and figure out something that pushes people, but also at the same time, if they grind it out and push really hard that year, they're going to hit it and surpass it. But also, if they don't quite hit it, there's still something to be celebrated because what they did get to was huge. Anyway, we hope you found these field notes valuable. We appreciate you listening and watching. As usual, check us out on all of the podcast streaming platforms, YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, all the social media stuff. And of course, if you're working on a project and you're building a consumer product, please reach out to us, klugonics.com. We can help you design, engineer, prototype, and source good manufacturing to make that product successful. Thanks for checking us out. We'll see you next week.